The Empire struck back in week 6. Every favorite has won so far heading into the Monday night game. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more coming up on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Nick, fresh off of a trip to Wyoming. Jeff, fresh off of a college trip to San Diego. But we had our eye on the ball here and we watched every single game so far. So we're looking forward to covering this up, or at least trying to catch up on a couple of rewatches here. But Nick, every favorite won, all but one favorite covered this week.
Yeah, finally, the public actually had themselves a day here, a stunning reversal from what we've seen through the first 5 weeks of the season, where the books have been completely cleaning up, and the only favorite to cover so far, I believe, is the Cleveland Browns. Right. Ironically, a team that pretty much everybody was on the Eagles this week. It's just so hard to get yourself to bet on this Browns team right now, and they didn't really play all that well. They once again, scored their usual 13 to 18 points. It looked a lot like a normal Cleveland Browns game, but we're able to return a blocked field goal for a touchdown. That was huge. We're able to at least move the ball a little bit more, control some clock in the second half of that game. But, Philly, for better, for worse, ultimately getting that win. I don't know that Eagles fans are feeling dramatically better about their team, even coming out of that win.
Sirianni,
you got Sirianni coming out with a buzz cut out of the bye. He's going at fans in the stands. I still don't really know what's going on with the Eagles. We'll get into that game later on. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this was kind of the comeback to earth week as far as the favorites go. We've been waiting for it these last couple of weeks, and I think we do staff picks each week. I pick every game against the spread for my article on the site, and it's been very dicey so far. But this was the week to go chalk finally. Yeah. I know Ben Fox, who always tweets out a lot of great betting info for ESPN and VSiN. I know he's been there in the past. Essentially all of the high money sides this week ended up coming through. Commanders actually were getting more of the money and more of the total bets, at least at the DraftKings Sportsbook. But literally every other team that had a lopsided side with more than 65% of the tickets won outright.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, huge week for the public, finally.
Yeah, good. Screw those guys at the sports books. Let's just finish Eagles Browns, because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on them anyhow. But here's a stat from Bill Barnwell that's pretty interesting. Since 2007, 566 passers. Deshaun Watson rates 558 among quarterback rating, yards per dropback 565 out of 566, first down rate 566. He is the nut low last quarterback, and since 2007, every single quarterback, that includes Zach Wilson, it includes every bad quarterback you can think of. Yeah. Deshaun Watson's worse than them. That is insane.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, offensively, this was the same game as every other week for the Cleveland Browns. Watson, 16 of 23 for 168, no touchdowns, didn't throw a pick. You'll take that, but only 244 yards of total offense for the Browns, who gave up almost 400 to Philly, 4.6 yards per play for Cleveland. They actually did win the time of possession battle in this game, which is interesting because yet again, they were terrible on third downs. I mean, 3 of 12 on third downs for Cleveland. They have been far, far, far and away the worst third down team in football this season. They're converting third downs, Jeff, at a 19.2% clip. League average is about 41%. The next lowest is 26%. They are 15 of 78 on third down for the year. I mean, this is all-time stuff. I mean, just horrendous. They've only made 9 red zone trips on the entire year. They only had 1 this past week against Philly. They also are the first team in 10 years to score under 20 points in each of the first 6 games of the season. They have 1 touchdown on their last 29 drives.
That's just astounding. That's just utterly astounding. They get the Bengals this week. They're hosting the Bengals. Yeah. Typically they play well against the Bengals. At least their defense does. So we'll see what happens there. But pretty ugly stuff. The Eagles were not pretty in their own right. They got both their wideouts, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, back. Both scored. The running game was horrible. Dallas Goedert got hurt early, and that was a continuing theme in the early window, was early injuries. We had a lot of them that were, a couple of zeros out there. Goddard had a 0. Marvin Harrison Jr. had a 0. Chris Olave had a half a point on his concussion. There were a lot of bad injuries there. And, they're almost all in the early games too. And I just like,
Mm-hmm.
my wife has a team with Olave and Harrison, both. That was brutal. Travis Etienne in the early window, of course, too, hurt the hammy. Jerome Ford got hurt. Dontavian Wicks got hurt. Tajay Spears, all in the early window. Pretty wild.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was brutal, especially for some of those wide receiver injuries. We'll talk about that insane Saints-Buccaneers game in a little bit, but Olave took a huge hit. And keep in mind, by the way, that the Saints, this is a brutal stretch of schedule for New Orleans. Played, on the road on Monday night last week. You're taking on a Buccaneers team that had played on Thursday, and now they play the Thursday game this week. So I think there's a pretty decent chance that Chris Olave won't be out there. They are playing the Broncos, who will probably not have Pat Surtain either, who ended up in concussion protocol early in that game. But you mentioned Goddard. He only played 3 snaps, so he was out of this game almost instantly. We did see both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith back in action, of course, for the Eagles, who were significantly healthier than the last time we saw them a couple weeks ago. It was kind of a slog. I mean, Philly couldn't really run the ball. If there's one good thing you could say about Cleveland, they did a good job on Saquon. They did a good job containing Jalen Hurts on the ground. Hurts did hit a couple of deep balls, 2 to A.J. Brown and then 1 to Devontae Smith that went for a touchdown. Grant Calcaterra had a big play, but that was kind of it. I mean, it felt like Philly was either getting nothing or they were getting like a 45-yard play to bail them out. But really, that's all it takes, against Cleveland. And I got to say, Jeff, we had a good week in Circa, went 4-1, only lost on Washington. We got in the mud. We took the Cleveland Browns, and I was very, very happy to see, Philly kind of shut it down after that last long play to A.J. Brown. They were able to kneel it out instead of, hitting the gas and trying to put a touchdown on the board. But Cleveland had a good chance to tie this game late. They had a 1st and goal at the Philly 8-yard line. It ended up being a 3rd and goal at the 3. They false start on 3rd down. They end up throwing an incomplete pass after that. Then another false start on 4th down, which essentially backed them up so far that they ended up having to take a field goal and trying to play the stop and timeout game.
Yep, and they couldn't get that stop.
Believe it or not, yeah.
Yeah, hard to believe. But yeah, I, for one, am shocked that they failed on 3rd down. Just shocked, I tell you there. Nick Chubb comes back this week. Yeah. Jerome Ford got hurt early in this game, so they actually need Chubb. So I almost think that Ford's kind of a cut at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think if you need to open up a roster spot, I don't think you're going to be too concerned about it. I mean, with the injury plus the return of Chubb, plus the fact that this has just been a terrible offense, it's hard to mount much of a defense for him. We actually saw more Pierre Strong than we did Deontay Foreman after Jerome Ford went out. So if you're in a deeper league or you're trying to kind of play the rotation in that backfield, again with Chubb coming back, I don't have a lot of interest, but just worth noting that Strong did outsnap Foreman 30-20.
All right. We spent way too much time in these
way
teams.
Too much.
Let's go on to Bears, Jags. Sorry. Doug Peterson, does he make it on the trip back home?
Well, they got one more game in London coming up next week against New England. So he probably hangs on for that one. If they lose to the Patriots, then I think it has to be over. I think it absolutely has to be over. We will see. This was essentially the exact game that I thought we would get. I was all over the Bears. That was one of my favorite bets of the week. That was one of my official picks for Bookies Plus. And this was a game that I thought the Bears would be able to win through the air. They did. Caleb Williams, 23 of 29, 4 touchdowns for Caleb Williams. Did throw a pick. Had DJ Moore open, I thought. Just didn't put enough zip on that ball. Allowed Andre Cisco to swoop in for the interception. DeAndre Swift got loose again. He's now got 3 straight 20 fantasy plus point games, which is crazy considering how we started the year. People are dropping DeAndre Swift. Been able to take advantage of some really juicy matchups, but hey, that's how the NFL works. This was also the Keenan Allen week, Jeff. I benched him in a flex spot and instead went with Tucker Kraft. That proved to be a critical error in my NFFC league. Caleb Williams, by the way, heading into Monday night is the QB1 on the week. Also was able to get loose on the ground. That's been a bigger part of his game over the last couple of weeks. Had a couple of big runs in this game, 4 for 56 for him on the ground. Once again, Jeff, I thought Trevor Lawrence was pretty decent in this game. He definitely could have thrown another pick or two. He was getting pretty reckless once this game got out of hand. Did throw an interception during the meaningful portion of the game. But, first drive of the game, Gabe Davis drops a touchdown right in the chest. He dropped another one later in the game. Brian Thomas also dropped a touchdown that was right on his hands. Again, Trevor Lawrence was not elite by any means. He wasn't the guy that we saw last week against the Colts. He has plenty of issues. I'm not saying that, but I still don't think he's like the primary problem here for Jacksonville. Evan Ingram was back. That was good. 10 catches on 10 targets for 102 yards. Also lost a killer fumble that really shifted momentum in this game.
Yeah, that was right at the start of the second half. You're like, okay, we got some momentum. We're in this game if we get a score, and instead lost the fumble. Bears go down and score, and it's just over after that point in time. The Brian Thomas Jr. drop, that hurt.
It was a garbage time, but for fantasy, it was brutal.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, we got one target from Mac Jones in garbage time, and one catch for 6 yards. I was hoping for the GTP, but nope, we got one catch.
Yeah, Mac Jones had more sack yards than he had passing yards. To give you an idea of how that went late in the game, like you mentioned earlier, ETN was injured early on. We saw a ton of Dearness Johnson yet again. Ended up out-snapping Tank Bigsby 35-17. ETN was only in at about 50% of snaps before the injury, so no surprise there with Tank Bigsby and Dearness Johnson, again, for some reason, taking on more of those snaps. Cole Kmet, tight end 3 on the year now in terms of total points in PPR, behind only George Kittle and Brock Bowers. He had a touchdown in this game, 2 touchdowns, actually. And the first one was a beautiful play. I don't know if you saw that, Jeff.
I saw the whole game. Yep.
I know the Niners have run this in the past. The Packers have run this in the past as well. It was Caleb Williams gets the snap, looks left, fakes, spins around, looks right, defense reacts. There's Cole Kmet just streaking wide open down the middle of the field. I mean, Jag secondary is the worst in football, but that was a really nice play design.
So you just need to give your quarterback time. The offensive line just needs that. We saw contrast in trick plays. We saw the Bears and we saw the Lions run successful trick plays. Yep. We saw Justin Fields get crushed in the Steelers version, and it moved a little slower, but it also, the line just don't hold up. I mean, Fields had no chance at all on that one there.
It was so bad that whoever was on play-by-play was like, get that out of the playbook.
Yes,
he literally said that on the broadcast.
I think it was Ian Eagle, if I recall correctly, and he is absolutely right. I mean, you want to anytime we can dunk on Arthur Smith, we do, mind you, but still, it was absolutely accurate there. And the thing you mentioned, Dearness Johnson, I just want to mention that real quick. He was in on the very first drive in the red zone, and I tweeted something to that effect. But why? It's like, why is he? Tank Bigsby, I get it. Tank has looked great all season long. Why is Dearness in there in that situation? I guess maybe he needed a rest, and ETN couldn't come back in at that point in time, but did later, and then had a hamstring later, and he's got the shoulder.
Yeah,
I think the Jags should recall the ambassador and send Peterson home now. I don't know, but it's just it's bad stuff. All right, one more game and we'll get our first break after that. We'll finish with my team, Bengals game against the Giants. I don't know if you were able to stay awake for this one. It was a long day for you with a lot of traveling and all that. It was a snoozer of a game. Even the announcers kept on mentioning this is an odd, disjointed game. Yeah, it was. It really was, but Bengals defense was the classic bend but don't break. They kept on relying on the Giants to shoot themselves in the foot, which they did. 2 missed field goals, interception in the red zone. They have one person that can rush the passer, Trey Hendrickson. Every once in a while, BJ Hill forced that interception a little bit too, but it was an ugly win, but it's a win nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, force the interception is one way to put it. I believe he just took it right off the head, essentially, right? But Daniel Jones just didn't put enough loft on it and threw it right into the line. And DJ Hill able to get his body on it. But yeah, this is the first thing I have in my notes is this was just a weird, boring game, which I did not expect on the Cincinnati side, right? I mean, I think this played to the script that you want if you're the Giants, but Cincy's been so explosive through the air, specifically over these last few weeks that I was on Cincinnati. I think I was the only one in staff picks to take the Bengals. And, part of it was a buy low on Cincy. It was kind of a fade high on the Giants. But again, this went the way that, I think for the Giants to win this game, they needed to hold Cincinnati probably under, 24 points. And obviously they succeeded in that endeavor. And the Bengals' second touchdown didn't come until very, very late in the game. It didn't look like we were off to this kind of game at first because Joe Burrow rushes for a 47-yard touchdown to begin the game. The entire right side of the field is just vacant. Burrow takes off, able to outlast the defender into the end zone. After that, though, Cincinnati goes punt, 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 fumble, field goal, punt on its next 8 drives.
Yeah, and it was well earned. I mean, they had a couple of drives that got stalled by a penalty or a sack, but the thing is, once Jamar Chase dropped a third down pass, they had to punt. The Zach Moss fumble in the in scoring position play was brutal, and we didn't really see much of Moss after that. And noteworthy that he was dealing with an injury coming into the week. So was Chase Brown a little bit too. Chase Brown had his fantasy managers in mind. I guess apparently Zach Taylor was yelling at him to go down instead of score. It was the Bengals cover play.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God. Yes. So that was huge. Needed that touchdown. And this was right after Chase Brown had fumbled 2 plays earlier and looked like he might have fumbled the game away. Thank God that ball ended up bouncing out of bounds. And you could see, He mouthed a word that we cannot say on this podcast after almost losing that. But yeah, I thought for sure he was going down. This was, a little bit after we had seen, a Falcons player had a pick six towards the end of that game. Well, it didn't affect the spread or anything like that, but slid down at like the 2-yard line. But the Giants were able to put together a drive after that. I mean, it was a 2-score game. And thank goodness they opted for the early field goal plus onside kick plan. They did not make the field goal, so it did not end up mattering. I was watching this game with my wife, and she's like, "What are they doing?" I'm like, I don't know. It kind of makes sense, but you actually have to make the field goal in order for this all to pay off. So it was just kind of a weird, depressing end of the game for the Giants. We also saw the Broncos, by the way, do the same thing against the Chargers. That would have threatened the cover in that one. So a couple breaks went our way in terms of the spread picks this week. Not a whole lot else to say from this game. You mentioned Chase Brown. I mean, he continues to take over a much larger share of the rushing load specifically from Zach Moss. I mean, Chase Brown was hovering around 25 to 35% of the carries through the first 3 weeks of the season. He's now over 50% in 3 straight weeks. He got almost 63% of the carries in this game.
And well earned. He was the better back for sure there. Although, they both put the ball on the ground at one point in time. They'll need a little bit better, a little bit of a better performance offensively against the Browns this upcoming week. Greg Joseph missed both field goals, and they were the exact same kick where they looked like they were going to be in and then just hooked at the very end. It's like one of my drives. So, it's just one of those things where you just couldn't get around it there. But anyways, tough. Yeah. Win's a win if you're the Bengals. Tough loss for the Giants, but at least they're in the right division. But they didn't lose the ground. Everybody, Eagles won, but the Cowboys and Commanders lost. So not bad.
Yeah. Both these teams still very much alive. I don't really have much else on this one. The last thing I'll say is, Joe Burrow, after, essentially stalling out for like 2.5 quarters in a row, made a huge throw rolling left on a 3rd and long to hit Yoshivas along the sidelines. I think that was like a 29-yarder that not only extended the drive, but ended up setting up the Chase Brown touchdown. I mean, that was a dime from Joe Burrow.
It sure was. All right. Quick note from our sponsors at DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right. Thanks to DraftKings Pick 6. And thank you, Nick, for such a lovely read. Well done. Let's talk a little about the Lions and just thoroughly dominating the Cowboys. Just an impressive performance, start to finish. Unfortunately, punctuated by Aiden Hutchinson's, easy for me to say, awful leg injury there. He's out for the season. The Lions looked like a team that had the bye week and was all just geared for this game. I mean, they had the brutal loss because the reporting error by the refs, pretty much, that they should have beaten the Cowboys last year. They took it out on them this week.
Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys were a popular contrarian side this week, and I never really bought in on that. I mean, we've seen the Cowboys, essentially anytime they've played an average or above average offense, and certainly the Lions qualify as the latter. I mean, they've gotten housed, right? I mean, they got crushed by New Orleans in week 2. They got crushed by the Baltimore Ravens right after that. And I know the final score for that game didn't look as bad, but remember they were down like 28-3 before mounting a comeback. And this game was over by the end of the first quarter. I mean, Dallas put together a really nice first drive, ended up having to settle for a field goal. Next drive, Dak threw the exact same pick in the end zone that he did last week, trying to kind of anticipate a throw to CeeDee Lamb. Safety steps in front of it. Pretty easy interception. But this is all about Detroit, man. I mean, this team, this team is a complete wagon. I mean, they could have scored 65 points in this game if they wanted to. They were running a hook and lateral to Penei Sewell, for Christ's sake, in the second half. I mean, they were just having fun, just kind of trying to run it up. It felt like, honestly, we ended up seeing Cooper Rush and Hendon Hooker for most of the fourth quarter for both of these teams. Detroit essentially stat all of its fantasy relevant players for the final 8 minutes. David Montgomery, who I know you and I both love this week, he was fantastic. Both he and Gibbs, basically hit all the overs on their props. 2 touchdowns for Montgomery as well. We had the Lions finish off a 16 money line parlay that I was able to throw in because gambling is legal in Wyoming. That was nice. Not having to resort to some of the secondary options here in Wisconsin. 7.5 yards per play for the Detroit Lions. Certainly could have been higher. It was higher, early in the fourth quarter before they essentially shut it down. But that was one of the best YPP performances any team has had this season. Sam Laporta, kind of disappointing. Only had 1 target. At least it went for a long touchdown. So you'll take that. Amon-Ra St. Brown was very quiet in this game. It felt like Detroit kind of made a point to get him a touchdown late. Yeah, that was really the last real drive of the game.
They had fantasy managers in mind. It was really kind. I mean, Montgomery scored. Jamison Williams scored. Laporta scored. Amon scored. The only one that didn't score was Gibbs, but he went 12 for 63, had 3 catches, so he didn't kill you either. I mean, they really had fantasy managers. They had our backs. It was nice.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's the opposite, right? Where it feels like teams are going out of their way to not appease fantasy managers, but it was hard not to for Detroit. I mean, they were they were in prime position over and over. I mean, Dallas, went out on downs to set them up. I think at around the 40-yard line. That was still in the first half. Obviously Dak threw a couple of picks. They had a fumble as well that ended up being recovered in plus territory. I mean, it just felt like every time Dallas had any semblance of momentum, something terrible was right around the corner. CeeDee Lamb, got his 7 for 89 on 14 targets, but he just still looks really frustrated throughout every single game. I mean, he had 13 total touchdowns over the final 11 games of last season. He's got just 2 total touchdowns so far this season. On the Lions side of things, I do think Tim Patrick looked really good. I mean, he's given them really good reps so far. That looks like a great pickup.
Yeah, well, I don't know why the Broncos just cut him loose. I guess they had a multiplicity of mediocre options, but maybe just a good quarterback unlocks a player like Patrick too. Cowboys are off this week. Perfect time to fire Mike McCarthy. Think that happens?
I don't think it happens. I think it might have happened by now if it was going to happen. But he's on the hot seat, no question. I saw somebody, some of those people that track, private jet flights were like, well, there's a flight leaving from Nantucket to Dallas tomorrow morning. That would be awfully interesting. Of course, referring to Bill Belichick, but I don't know. I mean, we saw a lot of shots of Jerry Jones looking shell-shocked throughout this game, and rightfully so. But I mean, as I mentioned, every good team the Cowboys have faced, they have not looked like they're in the same class. And that New Orleans loss looks worse and worse the further removed we get from it. I mean, that was the last game that the Saints won. Their only wins this year have come over Cleveland, the Giants, and the Steelers. And the Cleveland game was a rout in week 1, but they kind of struggled in both of those other two. I don't really have much else on this game. It was completely over, like we said early on. Jamison Williams probably could have had another touchdown. Really good throw from Goff, just a drop by Williams. Would have had a chance, I think, to beat the defender to the corner and rip off a touchdown. But they went right back to him on the third down a couple plays later, and he made a nice catch over the middle. But it could have been a bigger day for Jamison Williams.
Yeah, I love that. It was the next play, and they went right back to him. I love that they did that. I think that's just good, smart coaching. I just like everything about that. Detroit has a huge game against the Vikings this week. Vikings 2-point favorite, believe it or not. I did guess the line on that one pretty quickly so I wouldn't get spoiled. I actually said it was going to be like Detroit by -1. I just figured that they'd get a little bit of cred, but the Vikings are getting some credit coming off the bye week here.
Yeah, Vikings coming off the bye. We'll see on Aaron Jones. I think that really matters for me.
Yeah.
Still week to week. Obviously, we didn't get much update on him this week with them on bye, but I think if Aaron Jones is out there, this becomes a total toss-up game. I think I would still take Detroit with the points right now. I mean, they got Frank Ragnow back in the mix. I mean, this again, if you were on the Lions side, this went pretty much exactly like you thought it would. I thought Dallas would do more offensively. I wasn't forecasting a 47-9 scoregami result, but they could control the line of scrimmage, man. And, it's going to be tough going up against Minnesota off a bye, but I think Detroit, to me, I think they're the best team in the NFC, right? I think, Baltimore and Kansas City in the AFC are maybe the two teams that you would say, okay, I don't know if I would take them in a neutral site game, but I think Detroit checks the most boxes for me.
Yeah. The Hutchinson injury, though. I mean, we'll see how that hurts their pass rush. I mean, I think, Darnold with time is a lot different. We'll see if they get Hawkinson back for that matter, too. They opened up his practice window before the bye. I mean, I just think that'll be an interesting reaction there to see what happens to all that there. Let's move on. Arizona, Green Bay. Green Bay jumped Arizona early on. Jordan Love was amazing for most of the game. Had a couple of like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde moments there where, he made some really kind of confusing plays too. But for the most part, the Packers looked like a wagon.
Packers do look like a wagon, man. I think the Packers and the Lions are the two teams that just score most effortlessly in the NFL right now. I mean, their ability to pile up points, to rip off big plays is so impressive. And it's happened every single week this season. They led this game 24-0 and had a chance for more. Honestly, I mean, it felt like the way things were going, this could have been like 31-0 before halftime. Jordan Love did throw a pick. Wasn't really his fault. It was a slippery field. It was rainy. It was windy in Green Bay. It was like 50 degrees, just kind of an ugly day here in Wisconsin. Was looking for Bo Melton over the middle. Melton just fell down, threw it right to a defender. So not really Jordan Love's fault. And again, the weather, I think, kind of bothered both of these teams. Slippery field for most of the afternoon. Arizona had just scored a touchdown before that. You're thinking, all right, if they can put a touchdown up here, take advantage of the interception, this would only be a 10-point game going into the half, but a good job by Green Bay to force only a field goal after that turnover. The Packers forced 3 more turnovers in this game. All 3 of those were fumbles. They're now up to 17 turnovers forced through 6 games. That is 4 more than any other team. Philly and Vegas, by the way, have only forced 2 turnovers on the season. And I believe for Philly, all those came in that Green Bay game in week 1. But Green Bay has the most turnovers forced through 6 games since the 2013 Kansas City Chiefs, who had 18.
That's pretty impressive. And you know what? Everybody that wanted Joe Barry's head on a platter, Packers fans, they're pretty happy right about now.
You have to be. Right. I think this defense is still, there's still some cracks there, but you have to be really impressed with this performance. This was one where I thought the Cardinals would be able to hang around. They just didn't have the ball a whole lot, especially early on. We're able to put some drives together in the second half. I mean, 2 of those fumbles in the second half came, in Green Bay territory and what looked like we're going to be scoring drives. You mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr., just running through some other notes. He left this game early with a concussion. We saw Christian Watson, back in the mix. He had a long touchdown on the first play of a drive. That was a great throw from Jordan Love. Just kind of a classic Christian Watson touchdown where he's streaking open down the middle. Romeo Doubs, who of course was the subject of some consternation last week. He was back in a big way. 2 touchdowns for him. One of those came on a Jordan Love, just kind of huck it up there as high as you can and let Romeo Doubs adjust to it play, which it feels like only Jordan Love gets away with that. He might be the best, like, reckless fly ball thrower in the NFL right now.
Yeah, he might be. I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be, I look at the Cardinals and I look at like how they're just like hit and miss. McBride was good. Harrison just got us the 0. You look on the Packers side, Dubs, I love the body control he had on both touchdowns. Actually, somehow like he's able to freeze time. It's like some Matrix like stuff, something you haven't seen. But where he just, everybody else kept moving and he stopped.
Yeah, he's really good, man. He's really, really good. He's one of those guys that I think he's the least exciting of all the Packers receivers, but he's just very good at kind of everything that you need to be a successful receiver. But yeah, it's very good to see him back in the mix. Packers, like, especially on that first touchdown, basically the entire team like mobbed him in the end zone. So I think that story we could kind of put to bed at least for now. Dontavian Wicks went out early in this game, only played 10 snaps, so that helped Dobbs. We saw a lot more Bo Melton as well. Cardinals had 13 penalties, by the way, for 100 yards. They were the least penalized team in the NFL coming into this game, so that was big. They had a fumble on a punt return that was called back due to a penalty. That would have been a huge swing play had that stood. Green Bay, by the way, 2 more notes on them. One, the kicking game is still an issue. And this is,
another one.
Green Bay's dominating this game, and my group chats are just blowing up. Like, this is ridiculous. We need to get rid of Narvison. He missed a 44-yarder in this game. It feels like they have to address it at some point. It's going to come back to bite them, whether it's in the regular season, if it's in the playoffs. It just feels like this is not a stable situation at all. They're going down the same road they were last year with Anders Carlson. Huge stretch coming up for Green Bay. They get the Texans, the Jags, and then the Lions, Bears, and 49ers in their next 5 games.
That is massive. Well, and the NFC North, I mean, all 4 teams are good, and they haven't played each other much. So
those are the 4 highest point differentials right now in the NFL are the 4 NFC North teams.
Yep, and we get it already this week with Vikings Lions. I'm excited about that game. Bears are on bye, so we got that going for them. But and then you said, who did you say the Packers have this week? Oh, Houston.
They get the Texans in Green Bay.
Yeah, so that should be a fun game. I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. So yeah, good stretch of games coming up here, and looking forward to that. I think the AFC North has passed the mantle on to the NFC North, especially with the complete utter implosion of the Browns. You can't possibly say the AFC North is the best division, and the Bengals also are 2-4. So that's a pretty strong argument against that argument too. So there you go. Speaking of, but one team that is looking pretty darn good in the AFC North, Baltimore Ravens. They look like maybe the class of the AFC non-Kansas City division.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. We'll see in this Bills Jets game on Monday night. Maybe we'll come out and feeling better about one of those teams. I know Houston's 5-1, but I still continue to just kind of have some questions about the Texans. And I think we're going to find out a lot more about them next week when they do go to Green Bay. This was a really fun game. Commanders Ravens. Commanders lost. They didn't cover. But I still think I came away from this game like feeling just as good, if not better, about the Commanders. Like I thought they were either going to win this game or they were going to get blown out. And I think the fact that they hung into this game late in the fourth, I mean, if they could get one stop, they would have had a chance at a last gasp touchdown. But they were, they looked like they were close to the same class as the Baltimore Ravens. And I know Derrick Henry got his yardage. I know Lamar looked good, but this was not a walk in the park by any means for Baltimore. I mean, Lamar threw a pick early in the game that kind of set them back a bit, and you kind of knew early on this was going to be a dogfight. Good to see Zay Flowers have a huge game. Rashad Bateman had some big plays as well. We of course have to talk about Mark Andrews, who went off for 4 targets. Yeah. He went off for 4 targets. He caught 3 of those, including a touchdown, 66 yards. Played 100% of the Ravens snaps in 12 personnel. Played about half their snaps in 11 personnel. And once they went to 21 and 22, those numbers dropped off. But usage wise, according to PFF, we didn't really see a big change. We just kind of saw some more timely targets, more opportunity for Mark Andrews. So I would wouldn't read too much into this. He was still outsnapped by Isaiah Likely. We still saw Charlie Kohler in the mix, was not targeted at all on his limited snaps. On the Commander side of things, they really missed Brian Robinson. They only ran for 30 yards between their running backs in this game, 11 carries. I thought Baltimore did a really good job of corralling Jaden Daniels. He was sacked 3 times. Still had a couple runs where he was able to extend plays, but not nearly to the same degree as the last couple of weeks. Terry McLaurin just still being one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. 2 really tough touchdown catches. Both of those were great throws from Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Chip Coventry and I were talking about that matchup there for McLaurin and how it might be a lot tougher. And, he passed with flying colors. He's now like a full start every single week. It'll be interesting. Washington's run game should get well next week. They host Carolina.
Yeah.
Just gave up 300 rushing yard or 200 plus rushing yards to the Falcons. Who every week the running backs get well against them. So if it's not Robinson, it'll be McNichols and it'll be Eckler. But they did definitely miss Brian Robinson Jr. But one other note, Andrews was the target on the interception. He got a hand on it. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was a little mistake on both parts there, I thought. So, but it was indicative of that they were trying to find a way to unlock Andrews a little bit there after all the talk. I wonder, the thesis that the car accident was a bigger issue than people made. It can't be, you can't really prove it as a yes or a no, but it seems like evidence in favor of that there a little bit there. And he's working his way back in a little bit more. We got 2 user questions involving Ravens, so I'll go ahead and throw those up here right now real quick. Eric asks, would you do a Flowers and Mason for JT and Olave deal? Do you think they can get that done?
So Zay Flowers and Jordan Mason for Olave and Taylor. I think that's reasonable. I mean, both of the guys are hurt on the other side of the deal right now, right? So I think that becomes a little more palatable. I don't think Olave is going to play in week 7, and Jonathan Taylor still week to week. But I think now would be the time to put Zay Flowers on the table, right? I mean, this could be his best game of the year, so I think that's reasonable. Yeah,
and Mason's hurt too right now. We'll see if he's able to play. Yeah, that was a killer on Thursday night. He was going to so eat in that game. So I know. Frustrated. On that one there. I may have Mason in 8 leagues. So yeah, that was my most rostered player. And then another Ravens or Commanders adjacent trade. Friesel Fantasy asks, trade Dobbins for Brian Robinson and Darnell Mooney.
I would do that. I would rather have the Mooney Robinson side.
Yeah. Battle of the network dancing with the stars. Sort of level of stars there as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, Dobbins is legit, but I mean, Brian Robinson's been incredible, and he's been just eating up touchdowns. Anytime they're inside the 10, it feels like it goes to him. Yeah, a few good matchups coming up. I mean, they do get the Bears in 2 weeks. Don't love that. But Carolina next week, I mean, if Brian Robinson's back for that, I think that should be a huge spot.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about Colts and Titans and then the Texans and Pats coming up next. But first, quick note from our friends at Underdog. All right. Thank you for that, guys. All right. Colts, Titans. This was probably the most forgettable game on the slate, I thought. We got the surprise, the surprise. We saw that Anthony Richardson getting scratched, a couple hour and a half before kickoff there. After insurances, he's probably going to go. He's going to probably start. They didn't outright declare he's going to start for what it's worth, but everything pointed in that direction. Yeah. I had to scramble. And usually when I do my Sunday morning updates and all that, but I try whenever we had the London game, I try to do it Saturday night. So I was kind of in coast mode, and all of a sudden we had this. I had got to react. Go put Flacco in, take Richardson out. What did you think? What did you do there? What was your reaction to this game? Did you have any irons in the fire with this game?
This was my lowest ranked game of the week in the Pick'em League, which is just straight up picks. We had a great week there. Obviously it's a favorites heavy league when you're not factoring spreads in. But I was on a flight when I saw the Richardson news. I could see the alert, but I couldn't access my picks or my apps, so I just kind of had to live with it. I would have absolutely jumped over to the Colts if I knew Flacco was playing, because he's just been the better quarterback so far this season, and he actually didn't even play that well. I mean, this was his first start since week 13 of last season where he didn't throw for 300 yards. Still gave you 2 touchdowns, did throw a pick. He just gives them a significantly higher passing floor than what you're going to see out of Richardson, especially if he wasn't 100%. Speaking of surprise injuries too, I mean, Michael Pittman just resurrected from IR apparently. Yeah. 3 days ago, it's this guy's going to miss time, really bad back injury. All of a sudden he's back out there. It's bailed out. If you did start him, he did give you a touchdown on a really tough catch. Probably should have been picked. Honestly, It's just a good jump ball play by Michael Pittman, 3 for 35 and the touchdown. Flacco, by the way, NFL leader right now with 8 straight games with 2+ touchdown passes, dating back to last season.
Yeah.
This was just classic Will Levis on the other side, right? Threw a bad pick, almost killed a sideline worker during the game. Callahan said during his presser this morning, he was asked about, trying to get more big plays into the offense, work the ball downfield. He said, quote, "Well, there are calls that call for the ball to go downfield, and the ball doesn't go downfield."
This sounds all quite a bit like a coach that didn't want to, wasn't there when the quarterback was drafted, sort of coach there. Absolutely. This was an uglified game. I mean, Tony Pollard was fine if you had him. That 3rd and 19 draw play for a touchdown. That almost never happened. So that was a beautiful thing. If you have Pollard and maybe you traded for him in the RotoWire Stake League, for instance, there, and didn't have a great week, but that saved you. So yeah, that was nice. Yeah, and by the way, Josh Downs too. He came into the week as, he had the toe injury, and it was like, it looks like he may not go. And then all of a sudden he was fine. In fact, he was the favorite target again. Yeah. The line movement in this game was weird. It opened up as a Colts 1-point favorite. So technically, when we said all favorites won, when we did staff picks, the Colts were still favored. The line moved 4 points in the Titans' direction over the course of the week. So that was an underdog that won. But not for our purposes though.
No, Titans were a big sharp play, if you follow that kind of stuff this week, and obviously it did not come through. I mean, they had multiple chances to win this game late and just could not get anything going. It's desperation mode. They ended up, pitching the ball around on their last possession, but they had chances. I mean, the Colts did not slam the door shut really at any point, and Tennessee just could not take advantage. You mentioned Downs, 7 for 66 and a touchdown. I mean, anytime Flacco's out there, Josh Downs is a viable option. Alec Pierce was targeted 4 times at 0 catches. Just missed a couple of deep balls, the ones that it feels like he brings in every week. He did draw a long PI penalty as well that set up the go-ahead touchdown for Indy. In terms of some, kind of snap numbers, Tony Pollard, you mentioned him, outsnapped Tajay Spears 43-12, 17-6 carry advantage. Spears got banged up. Hopkins and Ridley continued to just be non-factors. Calvin Ridley was targeted 8 times. He had 0 catches in this game. It's like the 3rd receiver in the last 15 years to have that kind of target share and have 0 catches on 8+ targets. So just an elite no-show by Levis and Ridley. I mean, Ridley's the wide receiver 70 in PPR on the year. He gave you that 25 fantasy point performance in week 2. Other than that, he's had 8, 1.9, 2.5, and 0.9 fantasy points.
Yeah, and there was a supercut going around of all the targets, and they were all bad throws.
Really
all
bad
throws.
Levis was really, really bad.
Yeah. It is to the point where you could start making a case for Mason Rudolph, and that's saying a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I did, before we move on, I did just get an alert that Tajay Spears is considered week to week, and he will for sure miss week 7.
Okay, there you go. All right, Houston got well against New England. They jumped them early. This is kind of a theme early. Like a lot of good teams got up early in games, and Houston was one. They welcomed Joe Mixon back with open arms. That really, the timing was perfect with them losing Nico Collins. That Joe Mixon was huge in this game.
I mean, we've only seen him for a couple of games so far, but this rushing offense looks completely different when Joe Mixon is out there. 13 for 102 at a long run that almost turned into a touchdown. Dameon Pierce, by the way, 8 for 76. So they were finally able to get, some secondary running back going. He had a long run as well. Like you said, I mean, Texans looked like they were going to win this game like 35-0 early on, but all of a sudden it was 14-7 at the half. There was a time where it looked like New England was going to hang around after the 2 early touchdowns for Houston. New England forced 4 stops in a row. And then things really got away. Drake May took a sack fumble on the second play of the second half. That set up an easy touchdown for Houston. Austin Hooper fumbled a couple drives later. That set up a short field goal for the Texans. New England, though, I think we saw some good things out of Drake May. I mean, hit a nice deep ball to Kayshon Boutte. They scored their most points of the season. Even though they gave up 41, they scored 21. You'll take that. Drake May, 20 of 33, 243, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. But I think in terms of, did Drake May breathe some life into the passing game? There was a little bit more recklessness, but I think the answer is absolutely yes, right? It's like if you're still holding on to literally any receiver, Jalen Polk, Boutte, Demario Douglas, whoever it is in a deeper league, you got to feel at least a little bit better about them. I mean, the Patriots are willing to take shots down the field finally, which they were just not doing whatsoever. With Jacoby Brissett. Boutte led New England in terms of snaps and routes. Douglas led them in terms of targets. No Ramondre Stevenson, by the way, this week for New England. So we saw, there wasn't a whole lot of ground game going on for the Pats, but Antonio Gibson spent split time with Hasty. We saw some Terrell Jennings as well. But, I think the back to own, if any, in this backfield is going to be Antonio Gibson. And they have a winnable game next week against the Jags. Jags are 5.5 point favorites in London, which seems insane to me. I don't know what they've done to earn that.
Right.
But yeah, that's going to be
second week in London factor, Nick. Come on. It's huge.
I guess. I think I'll be on the Pats for that one.
Just watching the ads for that, because it's every game is on the NFL Network, and hearing him do a live read for it, it's like, that must hurt just to do that read.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel bad for Rich Eisen, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Last note I have on this game is that Texas put up 41. That's all well and good, but it's still, CJ Stroud has not cracked 20 fantasy points in any game so far this year. This is a guy who was, as high as the QB4 in some drafts that I did, often QB5 or 6, and he's been fine. But I think we talked a lot about the upside of, like, if you're taking that early quarterback, you need there to either be immense, touchdown and yardage potential, which we thought there would be for Stroud, or there has to be a rushing floor, which there's not. And right now he's kind of like QB9, QB10 on the year, which is fine, but it's not looking like you're going to get a boost on that investment by any means.
Nope, not at all. We're going to talk Bucs Saints next, but first, quick note from the Blue Wire Network. Happy to be on the Blue Wire Network. We've been on there for years now. It's a great platform for us. Thank you for your patience with that. Buccaneers Saints was the Gonzo Bananas game of the early slate there. 27-24 half, just scoring left and right. You got a defensive touchdown early for the Bucs, and then they kept on giving up points left and right. Saints had a punt return for a touchdown. Baker's throwing interceptions. Like, we were so cocksure about the Bucs, and it looked like, really? Spencer Rattler's a thing? Then it wasn't a thing. And then the second half was like, all of a sudden the Bucs developed a running game. It was odd day.
This was one of the weirdest games of the year. Bucs went up 17-0 early on. You mentioned the fumble return for a touchdown. That's the play that Olave went out on, by the way. He just possessed it long enough, took a huge hit. You could tell right away. It's like, oh boy, that's going to be a concussion. It could have been targeting, I thought, and there really wasn't any talk of that. But yeah, Olave was down. Again, had just enough possession where a defender was able to scoop and score that. So you think the Bucs are off and running. And I played the Bucs in Circa. It was one of my favorite bets of the week. And I'm like, all right, we are golden. This is fantastic. The Saints scored 27 points in the second quarter alone in like a 10-minute span. I mean, this was insane. They had the punt return by Rashid Shaheed, which was just a bad punt. I know you're punting from the end zone, but it was like a line drive short kick. It was like a 45-yard punt return, which you almost never see, just completely untouched. And then Baker throws 3 picks, I think on the next 4 possessions for Tampa Bay. And 2 of those were deep in Tampa Bay territory to basically hand points to New Orleans. But the Bucs were able to storm back in the second half. They finished this game with 594 yards of total offense, 31 first downs, 8.2 yards per play, 7.9 yards per carry, second highest yards per play in a game this season. Everybody's still chasing the Jags last week against Indy for that title. By the way, San Francisco on Thursday put up the 3rd most yards per play in a game this season.
Wow.
Against Seattle. But yeah, just a really, really weird game. The Bucs went punt, that was returned, interception, touchdown, interception to end the first half.
Yeah. This was so weird. This game, Mike Evans had 2 catches on the very first drive. There was a note from the New Orleans beat writer that Lattimore wasn't trailing Evans, wasn't shadowing him. Yeah. Those were the only 2 catches Evans had all day. He went 2 for 34. I mean, everybody. So it turned out to be like, just as everyone was saying, bench Evans or, diminish Evans this week. Everybody else, Godwin 8, Tucker 8, Cade Otton had a touchdown. Everybody else seemed to score. Bucky Irving had a monster game.
Yeah. I mean, Mike Evans ended up going out. He was kind of, iffy for most of the second half. Played only 43 snaps. I mean, he was out there, but it didn't feel like he was 100%. So I think that was part of it. Cade Otton continues to have a nice little role in this offense. He caught a touchdown. I think on the New Orleans side of things, if Olave misses this week, which I think he will on a short week, Bub Means all of a sudden becomes a guy to look at. 8 targets from Spencer Rattler. He was easily his favorite target throughout this afternoon. You mentioned Chris Godwin, by the way. I mean, what a year he's had. I mean, 5 touchdowns on 53 targets so far this season. JJ Zacharyson had a good note on that. In 2022 and 23 combined, Chris Godwin had 5 touchdowns on 272 targets. He is the wide receiver 1 now on the year in terms of total PPR points. It's Godwin, Chase, Nico Collins, who's still number 3, despite not playing this week, Jaden Reed, and Drake London. So those are your top 5 receivers right now. Stephon Diggs comes in at number 6. Alvin Kamara still the RB1 in PPR. Kamara, Henry, Saquon, Kyron, and Chuba Hubbard. Those are your top 5 PPR backs so far.
Yeah, Hubbard, what a great score for you as far as that goes there.
Seriously.
Godwin also leads the NFL in first downs, 30 first downs on his catches.
Crazy.
Too. That's just
crazy.
It's just an insane number. When you think about it there. But and it just means Baker's having a good year too. He threw the 3 picks, but yet still 325, 4 touchdown passes. I mean, it was classic Baker. Basically there.
I mean, one of the touchdowns for Godwin too was just like an 8-yard out that he just ran all the way for a 55-yard touchdown. I mean, this is a really rough day for the Saints defense. Really, both defenses didn't look all that good. But I think we got to talk about, Sean Tucker. Obviously, Rachaad White didn't play in this game. We saw Irving and Tucker both carry 14 times. Very run-heavy script for Tampa Bay late in this game. After they started piling up points, they scored 20 points in the fourth quarter. Almost all that production came on the ground. 9.7 yards per carry for Sean Tucker. It's like you feel good about Bucky Irving ripping off 5.8. But if Rachaad White misses more time, I think this could be a really interesting split between those two.
I kind of think this was classic run it up garbage time yardage. The Saints had kind of given up. I felt like maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's my impression. They remember they were playing on short rest. Now they play another game on short rest. Really horrible schedule. 4th concussion, by the way, documented concussion for Chris Olave in his career.
Don't love that.
Don't love that at all. Long-term concerns there. I would be stunned if he plays this week in the Peyton Bowl. So we'll see about that. But not good
I think he's out. I think he's out this week. Tampa, meanwhile, gets the Baltimore Ravens at home in primetime. That's going to be a really fun game. That's the Monday night game in week 7. Then they get the Falcons, Chiefs, and Niners. So key stretch coming up for Tampa.
2 Monday night games this upcoming week too, by the way. Yeah.
All right.
It's like early. It's like a little bit early late too. It's not like there's 2 Eastern time zone games this time. One of them is in Arizona, so it's going to be it's normal start time and 9 p.m. Eastern start time there. So you're going to have a lot of people complaining about the schedule this week. That's my prediction as far as that goes.
Yeah.
I'm complaining about the Chargers and the Broncos. The Broncos just no-showed this game. And granted, they lost Surtain early, but the Chargers lost 2 receivers early and a coach early for a while. Yeah. This is an odd all-around game. I thought this was a Justin Herbert masterpiece, though. I thought Herbert played incredibly well early, especially early on.
Yeah, I mean, as is going to be the case for most of the year, it was a pretty modest statistical game for Herbert, 21 to 34, 237 and a touchdown. But in this offense, that's the equivalent of throwing for like 400 yards. I thought he was great. I mean, some of the escapability, there were like 3 times where it looked like he was going to get the ball knocked out, and he was just somehow able to get the right arm angle, stay upright, deliver an accurate ball. I mean, I think he's now become underrated. I think there was a period where maybe he was a little overrated a couple of years ago, but I think playing in this offense, you kind of forget just how talented this guy is. But yeah, the Chargers led this game 23-0 before allowing Denver to put together some drives. I thought Bo Nix didn't look great by any means, but had some really nice runs to extend plays, extend drives, getting to the sticks on third down, getting outside of the pocket. That was probably the best thing that he gave the Denver Broncos on Sunday. They only had 45 yards of offense in the first half, so another really sluggish start for Denver. Javonte Williams lost a fumble late in the first half. That was a big swing. Yeah. Like we mentioned earlier, thank God Denver went for the early field goal to avoid potentially not allowing the Chargers to cover this game, but we escaped there. I was really impressed with Devon Vele. He made some plays earlier this season. He had some big catches in traffic, some contested catches, guys trying to rip the ball out, took some big hits. I thought he gave them a really nice game. Got to talk Ladd McConkey, led the Chargers in snaps, routes, and targets. You mentioned some of those injuries in the receiving room for the Chargers, and obviously Pat Surtain going out with a concussion early on. That was big. And long awaited, Jeff, Kamani Vidal in the mix after the bye.
Right.
Of course, Gus Edwards is on IR, so there was opportunity here, but we saw Vidal playing ahead of Hassan Haskins. Obviously, Dobbins still clearly the guy there, but 19 snaps for Vidal, 4 carries, and then an incredible catch and a great throw for a touchdown early in this game from Herbert.
First career touchdown on a wheel route. Give me a good wheel route.
Not an easy catch. I mean, that was arms extended. Yeah, that was a play that a lot of really good running backs don't make.
I love wheel routes, and you have time to make them work. They're a beautiful thing. You get to isolate a linebacker like that. Vele was a guy that was like a trendy pickup a few weeks ago, and then was a healthy scratch after that. Yeah. Finally, he's active now with Josh Reynolds on IR. He was the most interesting guy. But the Broncos, I mean, just when we think we start to trust them as a decent team, they no-show that first half. I mean, the first half was just a horrible, horrible half for them there, and they just set themselves too far back. Yeah. We thought we could trust Javonte Williams again. No, we can't. We only got 6 carries. I think that fumble had a lot to do with it, but it's not like they weren't running the ball a whole lot except for Nix just scrambling, and that's not a really sustainable thing.
Yeah, Broncos couldn't really run the ball. Chargers defense is still really good, even without Joey Bosa. So I think that was, certainly a big part of it. And last note I have on this game is we did see a little bit of Audric Estime, who's off IR. Played only 2 snaps, but carried on both of those. Probably not anything to worry about for fantasy right now, but just worth noting that he was back in the mix.
Just something to take away from Javonte if you have him there, basically. We're going to talk last 2 games, but first, a quick note from our friends at Circa. We love Circa. We love Stadium Swim. We love their sports books. We love just how they treat fantasy players. They love fantasy players there. They're football fans themselves. All right. Let's stay in Vegas. Let's talk about Steelers, Raiders, and just the clown show that was the Raiders again. Even when they make good plays, they can't help but shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, man. This was a comedy of errors yet again. The Raiders do play the Jaguars, by the way, later this season. I cannot wait for that game. It's just going to be like 8 total turnovers. I was texting some friends during the Jags game and the Raiders game. I have a Raiders fan friend, and this was specifically about the Jags, but I think this applies to the Raiders. One of my buddies who, he watches Red Zone, but he hasn't watched a full Jags game yet this year. And he's like, this is incredible. Like, I've never seen a team where every single drive someone new makes a mistake. And I was like, yes, that is the perfect way to describe the Jags. And I think that's the perfect way to describe the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders played horribly throughout this entire game, and still, this was still a 1-score game into the second half. I mean, if they don't fumble, on what should have been a walk-in touchdown, all of a sudden this is a game. But yeah, the Steelers were able to escape. Justin Fields, decent fantasy day, despite not really doing much as a passer. 2 rushing touchdowns, 59 rushing yards for him, gave you almost 25 fantasy points. As prophesied on the RotoWire Sports Betting podcast, this was the Najee Harris breakout game. First touchdown of the year for Najee, gave you over 20 fantasy points for the first time this season. The Raiders, by the way, it feels like they score in their first drive every week. I don't have the actual numbers in front of me, but they always start relatively well. They scored a touchdown right away and then went 3 and out, fumble, out on downs, blocked punt, 3 and out, fumble, interception.
Just brutal. Just the sequence at the end of the third quarter. They're having a good drive. It's at that point in time, the game's still in play, right? It's 22-7, but they're about to score. They hurry to get a playoff right before the end of the quarter when they could have just like gone to the start of the fourth quarter. Yeah, they get a touchdown. It gets nullified in an eligible pass downfield. And then next play, they like the second and goal, they get back to the one at the start of the fourth quarter, and then they have the fumble. Twice, not once, but twice. TJ Watt does the peanut punch for fumbles. They both work. Dylan Lobb gets his first carry of the year. Fumble. I mean, you're right. You're right. It's a new player every time that screws up for him.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was Amir Abdullah, by the way, who fumbled at the goal line. I don't know why he was carrying the ball there, but that was one that you just kind of felt like something really bad was going to happen after that touchdown got taken off the board, and of course it did. A couple other notes here: Trey Tucker was by far the Raiders wide receiver one with no Jacoby Myers and obviously no Devontae Adams. He had a huge lead in terms of snaps and routes. Was only targeted once though by Aiden O'Connell. Good news for George Pickens, who we were a little concerned about coming out of last week. Led Pittsburgh in snaps, routes, and targets. Had a couple big ones to really seal this game in the second half. Played a lot more in 12 personnel compared to previous weeks. And Raiders actually ran a good amount of 13 personnel in this game. And Pickens was out there essentially anytime they passed out of 13. So, kind of trended back up after a weird week 5. Brock Bowers continues to be kind of the only redeeming player for the Raiders. He goes 9 for 71 on 10 targets. No Zamir White, of course, this week for the Raiders. The Raiders did place Michael Mayer on the non-football injury list. So the kind of Brock Bowers versus Michael Mayer, how much are they playing together? How much are they not? That's at least off to the side for a while.
Yeah. Back to Pickens real quick. He did have a couple of drops, one in the red zone, I think.
Yeah.
He was, because I was lamenting Brian Thomas Jr. and then someone jumped in and said, how about the DJ Moore being ruled not in the end zone and having such a brutal day? Well, Pickens also was in that class, 3 for 53, but it could have been a what might have been. Also, Najee Harris had 2 huge runs in the second half, just wore them, it was running over players, which was nice to see. And Jaylen Warren did nothing, 6 for 7, 3 catches for 11, but we were worried about maybe Jaylen Warren being back. He went from, by the way, Warren went from doubtful to questionable to off the injury list. Everything's fine and actually played, but still not much of a big threat.
And played a decent amount. I mean, it was 31 to 25 snaps in terms of Harris. He did double up Jaylen Warren in terms of carries, which has kind of been the case. But, Warren was in there in plenty of passing situations, was targeted 3 times. So this wasn't like a situation where he only played 10 snaps and they were easing him back in. Like he kind of played his normal role, just didn't do a whole lot. I mean, this was more of a Najee Harris spot. And then one just, again, completely non-fantasy note, but worth noting, Roman Wilson did make his debut, played only 5 snaps. They're going to ease him into the mix. But this was somebody 2 months ago who were like, maybe he's a wide receiver too.
Yeah. And he may still end the season as such, but it's going to take a while. I often think that rookies kind of have to prove themselves with Tomlin and all that too. And especially it's not a wide open passing offense either. So that's the other thing. Final game. We got the Falcons beating the Carolina, and Carolina kept it close for a while. Falcons though, the Falcons just ran all over them though.
Yeah, this game was kind of like a way more fun to watch version of Pittsburgh and the Raiders, where you always felt like the Falcons were in control, but there were a couple inflection points where it's like, all right, if Carolina could get a stop and a score here, all right, this could get a little bit messy. Atlanta went up 22-10 with like a minute and a half left in the first half and allowed Carolina to go on a quick touchdown drive and make this only a 5-point game at the half. Carolina, we went back-to-back field goals for each team to begin the second half. So this was still a 1-score game at the end of the third quarter. Then we saw Andy Dalton throw a pick. That was a tough one. AJ Terrell with a nice interception deep in Atlanta territory. Falcons were able to turn that into an 84-yard touchdown drive. Unfortunately, that was a Tyler Algier drive for Atlanta. It kind of felt like after Bijan had the 2 early touchdowns, they're like, all right, we need to distribute a little bit here, get Tyler Algier involved. After that, Carolina kind of in desperation mode went out on downs. And then Andy Dalton threw the late interception that should have been a pick 6. Didn't really matter. This game went over no matter what. The Falcons were going to cover easily. But Phillips ended up sliding down very selflessly at the 3-yard line. I hate this, by the way. Like I get that it's the right play, but especially when you're already up 3 scores, like you're not going to lose this game. There's less than 2 minutes left. You're a defensive player. This might be your only chance in like 5 seasons to score a touchdown. Just put it in.
Yeah, I agree. If it's a 1-score game, and you just want to,
sure, I get it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one there. Just score. Yeah. I probably had the sideline yelling at him to go down or something.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
There, but yeah, I think that's definitely it there. Yeah, not much else. We'll see if Jonathan Brooks comes back, but once again, Chuba Hubbard, a very useful fantasy player, 18 for 92.
Yep.
5 catches, didn't get much yardage on that, but in a PPR league, you don't really care. You got the catches. Half point PPR, probably a fairer scoring system there, just because of players like this. The 5 for 11, you don't like seeing that.
We'll take
the
it.
Kamara game was canonical as far as like the argument against PPR last year.
Yeah,
he had like a 12 for 21 yard catch game, something like that. Algier looked good for Atlanta. Once again, Bijan finally had a game. He got his 2 scores, but once again, on another team, he might have had 25 carries instead, but they have Algier who went 18 for 105, was the closer in this game.
Yeah, Bijan was great. I mean, this was his best game of the year. Took 12 of 16 snaps in the first quarter for what it's worth. So like, if you're just looking at the box score, you're like, oh, wow, it's kind of a 50-50 split. I mean, Algier was basically brought in as the closer in this game. Like Bijan had kind of put in his work through 3 quarters, and then they turned it over to Algier. So it's kind of the same situation as always. You're not really worried at all about Bijan. It's just part of the deal. When you have a second running back that the team really likes, he's going to be in the mix. And there's still something with Bijan where, I mean, again, you look great. I'm not trying to take anything away, but like there were a couple plays where I'm like, I'm kind of surprised you got tackled there, or like I thought you were going to make that guy miss. Like there's just something a little bit missing. Like he's still a great running back, no question, but he was like a tackle away from breaking some really big plays in this game and just couldn't run through it. Kyle Pitts, you'll take it. It was his lowest snap percentage of the season, but that was largely due to Atlanta just running out the ball.
Yep, and he's not a blocker.
Half.
Yep.
So nothing real to take away there. I think he had 5 targets, 3 for 70, had a couple big plays. You'll take that. Deontay Johnson and Chuba Hubbard still remaining viable. That was good to see. Gettable Commanders defense coming up in week 7, for Carolina. They are big underdogs in that game. And the Commanders defense, I think, has looked better these last couple of weeks than it did early on when they were just, giving up yards to everybody. So it's still a plus matchup though, relative to kind of the rest of the schedule for Carolina. And then we saw Jalen Coker, of all people, serving as the wide receiver 3 behind Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette. So he outran Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah. Mingo, he was not going for contested catches in a previous game, and I wonder if that had something to do with it there. That might be one of the reasons why we saw a little David Moore, and Moore got banged up after one play too. So maybe that's why we saw Coker a little bit more. We saw a little bit of Coker last week too. So I mean, it's still, it's still Carolina. I think that's just the problem. It's just this malaise of a team.
Yeah. The offense they're still kind of fun to watch, right? Like I thought this might have been like a disaster spot for Chuba, but like you said, in PPR, it was fine. But this defense is just really, really rough. I mean, Atlanta put up well over 400 total yards, 6.2 yards per play. I mean, they put up almost 1,000 yards of offense in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. So, pretty good week for Atlanta, all things considered. They needed this. This is something that kind of like, this is holding serve. And they're 2-1 in divisional games. They lost to the Bucs. They beat the Saints. And they beat Carolina. Atlanta this week. What do they get? They're
home for Seattle.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting game. I don't know what's going on with Seattle right now.
Seattle can't stop the run either. This might be another good week for Bijan coming up here. So
should be. And then you get Tampa Bay after that. I mean, that defense still looks really shaky. And then Dallas the week after. So some pretty nice matchups coming up here for that Atlanta offense.
Indeed it is. So good times there. Any other thoughts before we sign off today?
No, I'm just, beaten down by the Jags. Continues to be a really sad franchise, but fun week overall. I mean, I think the last thing I'll say is that scoring might be back, Jeff. Yeah. I did not factor in last night's game because I was like basically falling asleep on the couch by the end of it. But going into the Sunday night game, all of the previous games, including Thursday night, we were averaging 51.8 points per game through those first 12 games of the week.
Yeah, I bet you the public does well on overs too then, because they tend to bet overs more than unders, I'm guessing. So I'm sure it's good for the public against those nasty, mean sports books anyhow. So good for them. All right. except for the ones that sponsor us. We like you guys.
We love those.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for listening to the RotoWire podcast / live stream. Thanks for joining us in the stream if you were with us here, and look forward to tuning into Nick and I tonight on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks for listening. Take care.